Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. We're doing another Year 1 video, this time taking a look at Captain Marvel. No other character has so challenged the primacy of Superman back in the day. As Captain Marvel, it would lead to lawsuits. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the first year of Captain Marvel stories and see sort of what makes this character tick, why he became so popular. And we start, of course, with Whiz Comics. Number 2 from February of 1940. Captain Marvel is created by writer Bill Parker and artist C.C. Beck. Well, it is night in the city, and a boy is hawking papers in front of the subway. He's approached by a strange man in an overcoat and a flop hat who asks why he isn't in bed. Very odd. When he finds out the boy has no home and sleeps in the station, he bids him follow. Very interesting, very creepy beginning to our tale. The boy is led to a weird subway train covered in symbols. Really stunning art and design here. The car stops at the end of the line, and the boy and his phantom companion get out and head into a subterranean cavern. Here, the boy sees the 7 enemies of man: pride, envy, greed, hatred, selfishness, laziness, and injustice. And he meets the wizard, Shazam. The wizard already knows the boy's name is Billy Batson. Now, this origin reminds me a little bit of the Wizard of Oz, inasmuch as it's this very American fairy tale, subterranean cavern under a major city approached by a subway train. It kind of mixes modern America for that time and this sense of wonder, this magical place, this fairy tale sort of world. Well, Billy learns that for 3,000 years, the wizard uses the wisdom, strength, stamina, power, courage, and speed granted by Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury to fight evil. But now it's time to pass his powers on to a younger man. He knows Billy's story, thrown out by his evil uncle, that he might steal the wealth left him by his father, and he knows that the boy is worthy. Thus he is instructed to speak the wizard's name, and Shazam! Captain Marvel. So out into the world he goes, and a newspaper story about a maniac scientist threatening to silence all radio, and an overheard conversation between 2 thugs causes Billy to investigate the hotel that the thugs enter. He is barred entry, and when he tells his story to the president of a radio station, he is not believed. But if he can prove his story, he's guaranteed a job at the radio station as a broadcaster. Well, that night, he returns to the hotel as Captain Marvel and discovers the fiend behind the threat, Sivana. Wow. So, as with Captain America, and unlike Batman and Superman, the arch enemy of Captain Marvel is there right from the beginning. Well, Captain Marvel leaps into action and destroys Sivana's diabolical machine and captures his henchman. Sivana watches this all through a TV screen and, of course, vows revenge. Billy ends up getting his job with the radio station, and so we begin the storied career of Captain Marvel. It is a very simple plot, to be sure, but we get Cap's origin story, which I think is pretty darn creative. We learn of the hero's powers, and we see him in action. We get the archenemy, Sivana, and Billy's job as a radio announcer. So we got all the basic foundations there for the character. Cap's fellow heroes in this issue, just so you know, are Ibis the Invincible, Golden Arrow, Spy Smasher. I'm going to do a review of the Spy Smasher serial here pretty soon. Scoop Smith, and Lance O'Casey and Dan Dare. So that's what you got in this book at the time. So this is the beginning of Captain Marvel. Love the art. Very minimalist, very simple, but really, really good. And you notice that the stories are not real complex. They seem to be aimed at a younger audience. Whiz Comics, sometimes referred to as number 3A. There's also a 3B. This is from March of 1940. Again, Bill Parker and C.C. Beck. The issue begins by telling us that millions of people listen to Billy Batson on the radio every day. That Billy Batson is a marvel. How does he do it? So there's one similarity between Superman and Captain Marvel. They both work in journalism, although Billy has sort of the more modern job, being in radio rather than in newspapers. And Billy Batson's almost like a combination of Clark Kent and Jimmy Olsen, Jimmy Olsen I don't think existed by this point in Superman. Well, this story involves the return of Sivana. He's gone and threatened the president of the United States, and he seems pretty darn proud of it. He plans on becoming the emperor of the United States, and he has an army of super soldiers, streamlined tanks, combat cars that can do 120 miles per hour, and the mightiest air fleet in history. Now remember, we're about 2 years away from America's entry into World War II after the Pearl Harbor attack at this point, but war is already raging in Europe and the Pacific, and war stories from Captain Marvel to Captain America are already finding their way into comic books. And I think kids were more prepared, in a way, for the coming war than adults were, because they'd been reading about this kind of stuff for a long time. Well, when Sivana attacks a week later, dropping troops a few miles away from Washington, D.C., Billy Batson rushes to the battlefront to report for the news. As Sivana's forces, this reminds me a little bit of Cobra, as they open up hole in the American lines, Billy decides this is a job for Captain Marvel. Now, apparently, Superman wouldn't say this is a job for Superman until the Fleischer cartoons in 1941, so he beat him there. I'll also note that Superman's bald, mad scientist foe, Lex Luthor, would appear a couple months after Sivana did. But an equally bald, equally mad scientist, the Ultra Humanite, appeared in June of 1939, Superman's first sort of supervillain. Well, with all that, Captain Marvel rushes into battle, defeats the tanks and the super soldiers. That task accomplished, it's time to go looking for Sivana. Note the very clean lines we hear. I really like Beck's art in these comics. Really reminds me of what Harry Peter was doing in Wonder Woman at the time. Well, he does this in the form of Billy Batson sneaking into the enemy camp, spying on Sivana, commanding his general over the radio. He orders the general to come to him personally, which means Billy can now follow him to find the evil mastermind. And of course, to do that, he takes the form of Captain Marvel. Superman's second big adventure was in a war zone it was either like South or Central America, hard to tell exactly which. So notice that his second adventure is kind of a war thing as well. I'll also note here that this rendition of Captain Marvel looks a lot like Tom Tyler, who played the character in The Adventures of Captain Marvel, which hit the theaters 1 year after this issue was published. Well, arriving at Sivana's fortress, Captain Marvel battles his way into the fortress, past guards, only to succumb to deadly gas. He is now at the mercy of Sivana, who, of course, has no mercy. Captain Marvel might have defeated his army, but Sivana has what he calls an atom smasher, which will blast him to bits in 5 minutes. But Sivana is in for a surprise as well. His escape is halted by his men, who were convinced that they would not be defeated in their attempt to conquer the United States. As he confronts the angry troops, Captain Marvel breaks his chains and makes his own escape. And then the atom smasher goes off, and Sivana is seemingly killed. So this is Sivana's second appearance in Captain Marvel stories, 2 appearances in 2 tales. Ultra Humanite showed up in several stories after his first appearance, and Joker did the same thing in the Batman comics. So writers hadn't really come up with the discipline to space their villain stories out. If a villain seemed to be popular, you stuck with that villain about as much as you could, but eventually they would kind of figure out how to space these guys out, especially as they built up larger rogues galleries for their heroes. The similarities with Superman, though, are pretty obvious at this point, but I don't really see Captain Marvel as like this lazy copy of Superman. It's a different take on the same concept, and he has a lot of cool original things about him. Whiz Comics number 3B from April of 1940, Parker and Beck, in the tale of Sivana's Venusian Kingdom. So if the first 2 stories were a bit like Superman's exploits, the third story breaks some new fun ground. It begins with Billy Batson getting a note from a Professor Xerxes Smith, who has built a rocket ship. And that professor looks a little bit familiar, despite that giant bushy beard. Well, Billy manages to swing a trip to Venus with the professor. As soon as they land, they meet a dragon, and Billy has to say the magic word, and I don't mean please, so he can fight it. As Captain Marvel, he slays the dragon, and then they fight some other strange animals on Venus. It is a pretty hostile reception. They are eventually overcome by giant frogs who take them to the Queen of Venus, Beautia. Now, at this point, we're in, again, this sort of American fairy tale, very reminiscent of like the Wizard of Oz. Captain Marvel, he does seem to skew to a slightly younger audience than maybe Superman did, and this story, I think, is a really good example of that. Well, the professor is now revealed to be, you guessed it, Sivana. They refer to him as Captain Marvel's deadliest foe, but at this point, he's also his only foe. Beautia unveils, and she is a real dish. In fact, her beauty has a powerful effect on Captain Marvel. She's going to be Empress of America and the world under Sivana's command, and she wants Cap to be her emperor. I love the pose that Beck gave her in this panel. It just, something about it just looks so real. It's great. Naturally, Captain Marvel refuses, so while Sivana and Beautia blast off for Earth, he is left to be consumed by a monster. Big mistake, of course. Captain Marvel beats the monster and then uses the wisdom of Solomon to design a rocket ship to take him back to Earth. Returning to Earth, he turns back into Billy Batson and starts looking for his foes, eventually finding Beautia in a beauty contest, which she easily wins. Getting her declared Empress of Beauty was Sivana's first step. Step 2 is pumping paralyzing gas all over America. Kind of seems like he could have skipped phase 1 there and just gone right to step 2, to be honest. But spying on them, Batson turns into Captain Marvel and goes to work. Note the hearts popping over Beautia's head there. She is a smitten kitten. While he foils the plot, Sivana and Beautia scurry away, but she leaves a note for Cap that makes him blush. You know, I've heard Fred MacMurray's second wife could make him blush. When she describes, we won't get into it, but yeah, kind of works for this character. Again, a very simple story, skewing towards younger readers, but it does introduce another recurring character, Beautia, who kind of is like a Catwoman, to his Batman in a way. The villain who sort of is sweet on the hero. You get the idea. Wiz Comics number 4, May of 1940. Beautia for president. With this story, it almost seems like Captain Marvel is already in the Silver Age of comics, or at least the late Golden Age. Beautia is back, and she's going to be trouble. She is running for president, and with her ability to influence men, she just might unseat FDR, but not if American women and Billy Batson have anything to say about it. Well, naturally, Beautia is working for Sivana, and he has a hell of a plot this time. He's going to every government official and everyone who voted against her. I'm almost positive that's illegal. Well, after that, they'll steal all the gold, and then they're going to destroy the White House and build a palace for Beautia in its place. Batson picks up Beautia's trail, but is set upon by Sivana's henchmen, who capture him and take him to Sivana. Now, since Sivana knows that he transforms into Captain Marvel, he puts tape over his mouth. This is essentially Captain Marvel's kryptonite and will show up often in his stories. But it's worse than all of that, for he has invented the memory mangler to make Billy forget how to become Captain Marvel. The machine works, leaving Billy with amnesia. When he tries to destroy the machine that hurt his head, Sivana's thugs step in, but they're stopped by Beautia. I guess maybe she isn't all bad. She hides the boy from Sivana and plays dumb when he returns. But unfortunately, Sivana's thugs have had enough of taking orders from dames and from Sivana. They tie him and Beautia up on top of a barrel of TNT. It's a hell of a way to quit a job. And they'd be doomed, of course, without a real stroke of luck. The dazed Billy wanders around in the dark beneath Sivana's lab and eventually ends up in the underground lair of Shazam. And I think we could say here that Shazam's lair is maybe sort of an extra dimensional place that kind of, it moves around a bit. You can enter it maybe through different places. It's, not necessarily a physical place, because that'd be a really weird coincidence. Well, Billy innocently reads the name Shazam from the wall and turns into the world's mightiest mortal, regaining his memory. And this allows him to save Beautia and Sivana just in the nick of time. Beautia wants to reward him with a kiss, and by making him her Secretary of War, but Sivana rewards him instead with knockout gas. The election is tomorrow, and he has things that he has to do. Well, Cap recovers and gives chase. There's some really wonderful panels through here. He finally catches Sivana and Beautia and sends them back to Venus on Sivana's rocket ship. The plot revealed to the American people, the election is called off, and Sivana, though, manages to jump ship before it leaves the atmosphere. So Beautia continues on to Venus alone, dreaming about meeting Captain Marvel again someday. Whiz Comics number 5, June of 1940, The Slaves of Dr. Lake. Well, after 4 Sivana plots to conquer America, we get a new villain for Captain Marvel's 5th outing. The mastermind in question, a phantom criminal genius, has launched a crime wave across the USA, and the police and news are desperate to discover his or her identity. On his way out to track down the story, Billy knocks down some kid who is listening at his door. The boy is part of a gang, and he leads Billy to their hideout, where he sees the adult leader of the gang, Mr. Scar, smelling a rat. Billy poses as a juvenile delinquent who wants to join the gang. His initiation involves having his brain scrambled, so he's hypnotized into obeying Mr. Scar. When Billy goes to a jewelry store to steal from Mr. Scar, he is interrupted by gangsters who clunk him on the head, breaking the spell. His memory back, he realizes that this is a job for Captain Marvel. Well, Cap foils the crime pretty easily. Some decent action shots through here. Beck, again, has a nice, clean style of art. Really works. The crook's foiled. He changes back into Billy Batson to confront Mr. Scar, who knocks him around a bit, necessitating a slight change. And of course, Captain Marvel has no trouble at all with Mr. Scar. He puts the guy through his own hypnotizer and discovers that the mastermind behind the crime wave is Dr. Aloysius Lake. He has agents in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Well, Billy / Captain Marvel then goes off to these cities looking for other boys who have been hypnotized into crime and breaking up their criminal gangs. He finally discovers Dr. Lake, who tries to give Billy a spanking. What are we in a Wonder Woman story here? But he gets pretty well spanked himself, which ends the crime wave. So we get a different villain than Sivana, but not all that different, really. Uses super science to start a crime wave to take over the country. As many superheroes as they had pop up in the 1940s. It's really amazing how long it took comic book writers to start creating differently powered supervillains for them to fight with. It very often was mad scientists. Technology was the enemy, and maybe they were onto something there. Whiz Comics number 6, July of 1940, The Circus of Death. I have said it before, and I will say it again. From the 1940s into the 1980s, if you were doing an adventure series, you had to eventually end up in a circus. And this one gets a little weird and a little bit dark. The story begins with Sivana landing 6 rocket ships from Venus on Earth, carrying a special cargo. We soon figure out what that cargo is. The circus is showing off weird alien creatures from Venus. I really enjoy the designs here. Reminds me a little bit of Winsor McCay's work. I also get a little bit of a Little Orphan Annie vibe off of what Beck is doing in these things, which just makes it very distinctive. The circus also has a caveman-looking strong man named Clarence and Lavelia, the trapeze artist. Apparently, Clarence is sweet on her. Yikes. When Lavelia's wire breaks, she falls into the tiger cage. Clarence rushes to save her and win her heart, but of course Billy is also on the scene and transforms into Captain Marvel. He saves her, punches a tiger, and poor Clarence gets attacked by another tiger for all of his troubles. Lavelia is in love. Clarence is pretty damn jealous. To get his revenge, he sets the alien animals loose. Captain Marvel has to wrangle all the beasts. While doing so, he earns the enmity of Sivana, who imported them from Venus for some evil scheme. He decides to mount up on the Goralian and attack. That is just awesome. Well, naturally it fails. And Captain Marvel soon scoops up all the animals in the tent and dumps them into the ocean. There's the darkness I was talking about. Hopefully the Humane Society wasn't reading the book. I assume they would be upset at alien animals dying as well. The story ends with Sivana fleeing back into space and Billy explaining why those dangerous beasts had to be destroyed. I wonder if somebody pointed out that drowning the animals might not go over all that well with the audience or with parents who might be looking at the books. Whiz Comics number 7, August of 1940, The Squadron of Doom. This is a goodie, and boy, do I wish these stories could be animated in this style. Roving reporter Billy Batson boards a ship owned by Rodney Stark that is headed to the North Pole. His presence is not appreciated, especially after he finds a crate of machine guns. We learn in this story that Billy works for Amalgamated Broadcasting. 6 months after the dunking incident, Stark's ship has disappeared north of Greenland, and 6 army pilots have been killed in Greenland and their planes stolen. So there's weird stuff going on. The president of Amalgamated Broadcasting sends Billy to investigate. Reaching Greenland, he hears a story of primitive men armed with machine guns. I already love it. Billy takes off in pursuit, but he's been betrayed by the man who informed him of the armed cavemen. His plane explodes in mid-flight, but he escapes as Captain Marvel. Unfortunately, he lands in the embrace of a polar bear that he has to wrestle. They do a pretty good job in these stories of sprinkling in the action scenes. Well, finding the planes, he changes back to Billy Batson, but falls and knocks himself unconscious. He's found by the cavemen, brought to their lair, where he discovers the missing Rodney Stark. Stark explains that he discovered Pleistocene men frozen in ice. He thawed them out, and they awoke with super bodies and super brains. Rodney decides to turn them into an army to conquer the world, which, I mean, I guess we'd all probably do that. And he would probably get away with this, except, Shazam. Captain Marvel chases and intercepts the planes, destroying them in midair and ending the invasion before it can begin. Another simple story. Kind of an uninspiring villain in this one, I'm afraid. But it does show here that Captain Marvel is not averse to killing when he feels that he must. And we also get an ad about Special Edition Comics, a 64-page single-issue comic starring Captain Marvel. You might remember that Superman number 1 was actually just initially Superman. It was a one-shot to gather up Superman stories. They're kind of doing the same thing here. So let's take a look at it now. Published in August of 1940, Special Edition Comics number 1. Now this has multiple Captain Marvel stories in it. The first is about a boxing match, the Champ versus Slaughter Slade. Slade knocks the Champ out with one punch. So Billy tries to get an interview, treated quite roughly there by the manager, who then also pushes a newsie. Looks like this guy really needs a butt whooping. Well, Billy, with help from Captain Marvel, manages to follow the manager and Slade, but he gets caught. Along the way, he discovers that Slade has super strength, and he picks up on a name, Dr. Allirog. I love how clean the lines in this art are. Again, great posing, the little smack in the face, the really, really excellent work. Well, Dr. Allirog proves to be a dangerous gorilla. Yeah, Allirog, gorilla backwards. A gorilla Slade claims he can control. The gorilla is strapped into a chair, and then Slade sends a henchman with $200,000, which would be about 4.7 million today, to Professor Universe, sinister master of all knowledge. The professor hands over a thick book to take back to Slade with the warning to be careful how he uses it. And how he uses this book that contains all human knowledge is he transfers it into the mind of Dr. Allirog. Now, Slade plans to use his knowledge and power, and Allirog's as well, to conquer. He literally says, first we shall seize control of the government. Every government employee, from president to Senate page boy, will be killed. Sivana was going to do the same thing. It's like, these guys do not mess around. Billy winds up thrown in a dungeon, a real dungeon, gagged, so he can't say the magic word. Well, luckily, he's attacked by a giant spider who rips the gag off, allowing Captain Marvel to save the day. Look at that art. Look at that spider. It's cartoony, but it really works. And I think it sets up the style and the vibe of these stories. And again, aims it at somewhat younger readers, which really gobbled it up. Well, he speeds to Washington, D.C., and he fights Slade and Allirog. But then the gorilla gets away with the president and carries him to the top of the Washington Monument. Apparently, Allirog had the knowledge of the King Kong story and said, that looks like a great idea. Well, they use Slade to order Allirog down, so he jumps. And Captain Marvel has to save the president. You get the setup here for a Gorilla Grodd sort of character, but the gorilla's super knowledge really doesn't come into the story, honestly. And they confirm that he perishes in the fall and will be stuffed and put in a museum. Well, don't be so sure of that, but that's what they do here. The second story in the volume involves a haunted house, pretty common trope in the Golden Age. We saw Captain America deal with one or two of those in his adventures. This house is haunted by a ghost who packs a pistol, and it turns out to be a Scooby-Doo sort of setup with a hidden treasure and guys in disguises. Well, Captain Marvel then takes on crooked gamblers. Golden Age Flash had a very similar story. And he finally gets another round with Sivana, who's controlling the weather and putting insurance companies on the hook. The World Realty Company is reaping most of the reward, but they don't want to talk to Billy. With some investigation, Billy learns that the weird weather is probably caused by planetary disturbances. That leads Billy to Sivana. He hitches a ride on his rocket ship and gets into trouble again with the native fauna, well, maybe it's a little both, of Venus. And I love that Sivana is using super science to basically just run an insurance scam. Well, when Sivana tries to destroy New York City, and Billy, in one fell swoop, Interest Beautia of Venus intervenes, unfortunately to little effect. I gotta say, CC Beck draws a real pretty girl. Well, fortunately, including Billy in the giant Venusian cyclone allows him to become Captain Marvel and end the threat. When Sivana shows up in New York, he discovers he has been foiled and Billy is still alive. Sivana is not thrilled, but he plays it cool there. But before the story is over, Billy has to fight giant locusts trying to eat Nebraska's corn crop. And then there's a follow-up on Venus. He finally foils Sivana's ultimate scheme. So this book sort of introduces a new villain, Dr. Allirog, but really shows how this strip is progressing. It is unabashedly written as sort of a fun fantasy adventure strip. And it's definitely aimed more for little kids. Whiz Comics number 8, September of 1940, The Menace of the Skull. Well, we live in a very different entertainment environment than people did in the 1940s, proven by this comic, which opens at an amusement pier where a girl, Princess Patricia, is diving off a platform while riding an elephant. Again, images reminds me a little bit of Winsor McCay in this one. The trick doesn't go off perfectly, so Captain Marvel has to save them, dragging them out of the ocean and onto the beach. Princess Patricia claims they got caught in the current. It was unusually strong, like the pull from a propeller. That's when Billy notices a yacht, the Skull, leaving in a hurry. The yacht is owned by the infamous Captain Death. I think Charles Middleton would have played this guy in the film adaptation. Seems like he would have been right for it. America's ace radio reporter, that's Billy, soon figures out that the Skull shows up in lots of places with accidents. Being no fool, he rushes right off to visit Mrs. Moneypenny, in this case the widow, of a millionaire drowned mysteriously, not somebody working for British intelligence. She's just received a note from a Professor Skull that if she'd like to meet her husband, she needs to show up at his studio that afternoon. Billy decides to tag along. Well, Professor Skull turns out to be a fortune teller who conjured her husband in a crystal ball. This was a pretty common trope in old mystery stories back then. Well, Billy smells a racket, so he investigates further. Using an airplane, he spies on the skull and discovers them pulling the same trick that they used before on another wealthy man, sucking him underwater. When Billy tries to rescue him, the yacht shoots at his seaplane and destroys it. He ends up underwater and caught in the yacht's vortex, and he's sucked into the yacht where he meets Captain Death. Once inside, he discovers the missing and presumed drowned people. They were kidnapped. Naturally, Billy turns into Captain Marvel and kicks a bunch of butt. We get another good indication of how powerful and invulnerable he is in the sequence, biting through artillery shells and such. Watching via TV, Professor Skull knows the jig is up, so he uses a remote control to sink the ship with all hands on board. Captain Marvel has to save them, drops the yacht off in like this, football stadium, and he streaks over to Professor Skull's where he nabs the villain. Like in the early Superman stories, we don't get complex narratives, very basic, that rely on the novelty of Captain Marvel's superpowers. Whiz Comics, number 9, October of 1940. The Fantastic Crimes of Dr. Durgan. This issue opens with the revelation that the crown jewels of the Kingdom of Elba have been stolen, I'm guessing, by Dr. Durgan. They were in the U.S. to raise war relief funds. Remember, in 1940, U.S. is not in World War II, but lots of other countries are. The police are baffled. There are no clues to how the jewels were stolen from their case or even how the thieves got into the building. But Billy has an idea. His investigations lead him to a toy store where he discovers that a Dr. Roy Durgan bought a perfect autogyro model, which Billy thinks was used in the robbery. Dr. Durgan wants nothing to do with reporters, so Billy strikes out pursuing that angle. But while at his house, he sees an autogyro model flying, and he intercepts it as Captain Marvel. And it turns out that Billy's theory was correct. The theft was committed by a tiny man in a toy autogyro. Yes, that was Billy's theory. And he was right, so you can't fault him. Well, naturally, Dr. Durgan is behind it all. He has a ray machine / camera device that transfers people to a sort of film, which he develops them as miniature people. When Billy is captured, he is put before the camera, but the tiny man unties his bonds and he turns into Captain Marvel just in the nick of time, turns the tables on Dr. Durgan, shrinking him. The tiny man then slaps the crap out of Durgan until he reveals the way to reverse the process. This leads to the recovery of the jewels. He leaves them on the table for the police, flies back to the city. But when he gets back, he finds that Dr. Durgan has made himself large again and escaped with the jewels. Cap takes off after him, and the autogyro ends up crashing into a haystack and catching fire, a fire that Cap puts out with milk from a milk tanker, like the truck trailers that hold liquids. Yeah. In the end, the felons are caught. Another simple story with some rather fantastic elements to it. Whiz Comics number 10, November of 1940, The Winged Death. This issue has a war theme as well. Spies and saboteurs are hitting targets all over California. As Billy waits for a plane to Cali, he sees a newsreel and recognizes Beautia, Queen of Venus, who is posing as Dot Darling, a news reporter on news reels. Well, when Billy goes to Hollywood, he schedules a meeting with this woman, cleverly disguising himself with sunglasses, which actually works. It fools her. Well, Billy and Dot end up photographing a battleship display, but the cameras are turned off for the test of a secret weapon, an aerial torpedo, basically a cruise missile. But that night, Billy sneaks back to the studio and discovers Dot Darling giving some microfilm. She had this camera that was hidden in her locket to Knuckles Nickerson. Nickerson soon takes off in an airplane for a rendezvous with his master, who has his own battleship. Very impressive. Naturally, Captain Marvel follows him. They land on a fortified island, and the master turns out to be Sivana. He's going to make lots of aerial torpedoes and use them to sink the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He would have beat the Japanese to this, by about a year if he'd gotten away with it. Sivana gags him to prevent him from saying the magic word and then puts him in a death trap, molten steel, that will kill him when it pours from its container. But a drop of molten steel burns through the gag and, I'm sure you can guess, Shazam, Cap escapes. Sivana discovers that Beauty is going to betray him by warning the fleet. He launches an aerial torpedo at her cruiser, but Captain Marvel stops it. He then saves the fleet by catching all of the aerial torpedoes. Sivana escapes on the last aerial torpedo that he had, but while Captain Marvel pursues, he has to stop to once again rescue Beauty, so Sivana gets away. Whiz Comics number 11, December of 1940. In this issue, we're taking on crooked college football. Can you imagine such a thing? Actually, can you imagine when there were things that were actually illegal to do in college football? Well, Coach Slug Sampson of Marvel College is destroying his competition, but he's done some time as well. So Billy's boss enrolls him in college to get the lowdown. They suspect this guy might be up to no good. They want to find out before the final game of the season against good old State University. Well, this bit is interesting, and I don't know if they ever use it again. Billy has to pass a tough exam to get into the school, so he cheats by whispering Shazam. This causes his other self to sort of half appear like as an invisible spirit and help him with the answers. Thought that was really quite clever. Well, he does so well on the exam that Ben Strang invites him to join Skull Club, inviting him by bashing him on the head with a club. Strang is pretty straightforward. Well, Billy shows up at the clubhouse that night and is hazed into the club along with some other pledges. The final test has them tied to a railroad track with an oncoming train. The idea is to pull the switch to divert the train so it doesn't actually run them over, but just scare them. But the switch doesn't work. So Shazam, Captain Marvel, saves the pledges. Ultimately, Batson gets into the club and becomes the football team's new water boy because Ben Strang is on the football team. Well, Billy becomes suspicious when the coach calls the other team a pushover, which normally coaches don't do. And yes, they do wear uniforms patterned on Captain Marvel's costume. Well, when the team fullback takes ill, Captain Marvel tries out for the team. But the better he is, the less the coach wants him. Very suspicious. Well, it turns out the coach wants to lose the last game because there's gambling involved. You get the idea. So he also drugs the water pails of his own team with a downer. But Billy sees him do this, and he replaces the water. Well, during the game, there's all sorts of dirty tricks are played to stop Marvel College. And as Marvel's players are knocked out of the game one by one, looks like they're going to have to forfeit. But Captain Marvel arrives and fills in for the entire team. Naturally, he wins the game 9-6, and the crooked coach and gamblers are thwarted. Whiz Comics, number 12, January of 1941, The Engine of Doom. And here we get yet another sign of the times. The Nazis are warning the United States about sinking one of our ships, a rescue ship, which could drag us into the war. Billy volunteers to go to Europe and sail back on this refugee ship. Maybe he can do something to stop it from being sunk. Now, note the misspelling of Nazi there, which is kind of interesting that they didn't just want to use the term. Also note, dragging us into the war at this point, there are a lot of Americans who did not want to get involved in yet another European bloodbath. It's their problem. Let them deal with it. Now, over time, as it became more obvious what the Germans were up to, of course, it made more sense to get into the war, but a lot of folks didn't want to get into it right away. Well, on the way over to Europe, Billy's airplane is attacked by a German fighter. He has to become Captain Marvel to save the day. He destroys the attacking fighter and rescues the airliner. Notice, not wearing a cape there. Now, landing in Europe, he meets Edward Smith, the man in charge of the refugees. They say he's taken good care of them, but Billy's a little suspicious, especially when he hurries away while an air raid is going on. Doesn't seem like he's taking care of people then. Well, Captain Marvel then has to protect the refugee shelter from a German bomb, high explosive, and carrying a poison gas. When a Stuka attempts to dive bomb the survivors, Captain Marvel flies up, rips the engine out of the airplane. Pretty sure the pilot ain't going to survive that. All's fair in love and war. And he uses the propeller to blow away the poison gas. And again, no cape. So I'm not sure if they were going for a different look or what here, but no cape for this particular issue. Billy sneaks aboard the refugee ship to keep an eye on things. Unfortunately, he does this with blackface. It's part of the times, unfortunately. Well, while aboard, he catches Smith signaling somebody out at sea, and soon a torpedo is heading for the ship. So Captain Marvel leaps into action, riding it like a surfboard and steering it back into the sub. He then rescues the crew and turns Smith and the U-boat crew over to the captain of the ship. 5 days later, they reach New York in safety, and we reach the end of Captain Marvel's first year in print with another simple story. Again, they're bringing the war into things, whatever you do, don't mention the war. They mentioned the war a lot back then. But a simple story, but it gives you the idea. It's action, it's adventure. There's a sort of fairy tale feel to a lot of this stuff. That's the Captain Marvel formula, and it was a very successful one. In March of 1941, Captain Marvel would get his own title, Captain Marvel Adventures, and it would be published until 1953, and he would eventually be famous for the Marvel family. Captain Marvel Jr. would appear in Whiz Comics number 25, December of 1941. Mary Marvel first appears in Captain Marvel Adventures number 18, a year later in December of 1942. And almost a year after that, we get Uncle Marvel in WOW Comics number 18, October 1943. So Batman beats Captain Marvel to the punch with Robin, his kid sidekick, but Captain Marvel had a family long before Superman did. Lois Lane dreamed of being Superwoman in May of 1943 in Action Comics number 60. Jimmy Olsen wishes up a Supergirl in Superman number 123 in August 1958. And we finally get the Supergirl we all know and love in Action Comics 252 in May of 1959. So Superman versus Captain Marvel. There are obvious similarities, but I think there's a lot of distinct things about Captain Marvel. His origin, his powers are a little bit different. There's some of the basics there, but he doesn't have some of the powers that Superman has. So similarities, but I think they're different enough. And he definitely had some innovations as well. I love Captain Marvel. There's this sense of childlike wonder to him. Again, it's meant for younger kids, like fairy tales, but I think it really works. And I think that's why it captured such an audience and raised the ire of National Comics so that they pursued things in the courts, sadly. But I think in his first year, we get all the foundations of the character. We do get a couple villains, primarily Sivana, but we do have Dr. Allirog show up. Obviously, more we're going to be on the way soon. Really great rogues gallery for Captain Marvel, but you do see how they really lay the foundations of the character here in this first year of stories. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you a fan of Captain Marvel? Do you dig him? If you do, I have done a review of the Captain Marvel serial, and I've done a review of the Filmation cartoon from 1980 you might want to check out. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. In the meantime, though, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Shazam!